The Catan, also known to the Eldar as the Yngir, are beings of pure energy that form a fundamental constant of the universe. Said to be the first beings in existence, they led the Necrons in their war against the Old Ones before their followers turned on them and shattered most of them into shards to be used as weapons of war. Although their exact origin is unknown, it is believed that the Catan were born during the creation of the universe itself, formed of the insensate energies unleashed in the churning mass of unimaginable force. It was long before the planets first formed and cooled that the first self-aware entities emerged from the seas of plasma and solar flares. While these creatures would later be known as the Catan, during the early stages, they bore little resemblance to the terrifying entities they would later become. At these early stages, they were merely monstrous parasites suckling upon the stars that bore them, shortening their lives by uncounted millennia. In time, these star vampires learned to fly on diaphanous wings of magnetic flux, leaving their birthplaces and drifting to new feeding grounds. They paid no heed to solid matter, for the internal fires and electromagnetism of the newborn planets were insufficient to register on their monstrous hunger. These beings continued their benign existence with little conception of the universe until the intervention of the Necrontyr, the progenitor race that would become the Necrons. Since their earliest times, the Necrontyr had studied the stars to understand their baleful energies, seeking some power to unleash upon their bitter enemies, the Old Ones, during the war in heaven. The Necrontyr had been defeated by the Old Ones and scattered to the halo stars and had fallen into civil war, the second such war of secession. It was during this period that they, under their silent King Zarek, had perceived anomalies in the oldest dying stars. They had discovered a sentience more ancient than any corporeal life form in creation, beings of pure energy in the complex skeins of etheric energy. These beings, found feeding upon the solar flares and magnetic storms of bloated red giants, were perceived as the progeny of the Necrontyr death god, who would act as weapons of retribution to cast down the Old Ones. As such, they would name these celestial anomalies the Catan, which means star gods in the Necrontyr language. There are various conflicting accounts about the circumstances of the discovery of the Catan. The archives of Solemnace claim their discovery was accidental, a chance discovery made by a stellar probe during the investigation of a dying star. The Eldari account within the Book of Mournful Night claims that the raw hatred the Necrontyr felt for the Old Ones sang out across space and served as a beacon for the Catan. Regardless of the circumstances prior to the first contact, contact was first established with a Catan known as Azagorod, the Nightbringer, which was born upon the very cruel star that the Necrontyr first lived their brief, irradiated, and morbid lives. Upon manifesting across the incorporeal starlight bridge, the Nightbringer was incarnated within a body of living metal necrodermis and brought with it the curse of death. Having fed upon the flavorless power of a star, the Nightbringer found delight in the Necrontyr's awe and fear and had begun slaughtering those who had brought it into being, feeding upon their terror and suffering. Only by the desperate pledges of servitude were the Necrontyr able to convince the Nightbringer that there were other species beyond number for it to destroy. Soon after, the Necrontyr awakened many other star gods, the Necrontyr becoming their willing servants in their war against the Old Ones. These kin of the Nightbringer also craved worshippers and slaves, although such servants soon descended into murderous insanity brought on by the presence of the star gods. One Catan in particular, outstripped all others in accumulating followers and devotees, Mephetran the Messenger. Being one of the weaker Catan, it instead gained power through guile and persuasion to secure its future, even sending its slaves to serve other Catan to curry favor. While to the Necron tier, Mephetran was known as the Messenger. Amongst its own kind, it was known as the Deceiver. With honeyed words, the Deceiver spoke of an ancient war between the Old Ones and the Catan, long before the birth of Necrontia, a war the Catan lost. The Deceiver and its brethren hid themselves away from the vengeance of the Old Ones, and the Catan bided their time until they could find allies against them. To that end, the Deceiver offered the Triarch Council two things the Necrontia desperately sought: unity and immortality, which would be implemented in the form of biotransference. For 1 year since the Deceiver's proposition, the Triarch and the nobles of the royal court debated the matter, with Orican, the court astrologer, being the only dissenting voice. Regardless of the dissent, the Triarch ultimately agreed to the Deceiver's offer. This tale, of course, was all a lie. The Necrontia nobility would be first to enter soul forges of biotransference, and those who resisted would have their limbs broken and be carried to the soul forges by ghost arcs. A notable organized resistance was formed by Nephrith the Untouched, the last natural pharaoh of the Amunos dynasty, who took war to the Catan themselves. Nephrith had given hope to the Necrontia, as he alone was free of the cancers that blighted the entire species. However, this was yet another deception of Mephetran. The supposedly disease-free Nephrith was in fact a cast-off Catan shard of the Deceiver, who plotted to rally opponents of biotransference under a single flag in order to totally crush resistance. The real Nephrith was switched out in his infancy by the Deceiver. As the furnaces of Cyclopean machines of biotransference clamored, the Catan swarmed about the sites, drinking in the torrents of cast-off life energy and gaining strength. This life energy was spirit matter, a metaphysical energy savored by the Catan. Only as the silent King Zarek watched the Catan feast upon the life essence of his people did he realize his terrible mistake. The Necrontia had become the soulless Necrons, and the Catan now fought as one, thus dooming the Old Ones to eventual defeat. Planets were razed, suns were extinguished, and whole systems were devoured by black holes summoned by the reality-bending powers of the star gods. However, as the Catan feasted upon the lives of countless species, the Deceiver convinced the Catan that they themselves were the greatest feast to be had, and the Catan fell into civil strife as the greatest amongst them consumed the weaker ones. With this reprieve, the Old Ones' nurturing of younger races, including the Eldar, Rashan, Kanib, and many other, had finally borne fruit, and were unleashed upon the forces of the Catan and Necrons. During this time of great infighting amongst the star gods, the sentient warp weapons that would become the Eldar gods likewise fell into infighting. Pacts were made and broken, and the line between the ether gods and star gods blurred. As the hot-blooded young races nurtured by the Old Ones spread across the galaxy, their warp-spawned magics battling the arcane science of the Necrons, the empire of the Catan was driven back as the warp was anathema to them, and even the Catan themselves were driven back by the relentless advance. The Catan unified for the first time in millions of years with a Catan known as Magladroth, the Void Dragon, developing a plan to seal the warp from the material universe, using a network of Blackstone warp suppression pylons such as the ones upon Cadia and within the Cerberus Shroud. Likewise, the Catan had sown a terrible crop by grafting a new arcane genome that could refute warp energy. This genome was used in the creation of Necron pariahs and literally severed the local connection of the warp to real space. Interestingly, it has been suggested that humans inherited this genome in the form of the pariah gene, which causes psychic blanks. Nonetheless, with these warp nullifiers, the C'tan were also finally able to breach the Old One's galactic warp tunnel network thanks to a C'tan known as Nyadrazatha, the Burning One, using a series of living stone portals known as Dolmen Gates. With the webway breached and beset by warp-spawned perils, the Old Ones finally perished. With the C'tan having spent much of their energy to achieve this victory, the Silent King Zarek chose this short-lived moment of victory to finally turn upon the C'tan. Thus, the Silent King launched an all-out assault on his C'tan overlords. Due to their energetic nature, killing a C'tan is next to impossible. However, the Necrons found other ways to render their foes exterminated. In the case of Landugor, the Flayer, it was destroyed, whereafter it cast the Flayer virus upon the Necrons. In most cases, however, the C'tan were fragmented into shards and held within multi-dimensional prisons known as Tesseract labyrinths to later be used as unwilling weapons by the Necrons. Other C'tan are speculated to have simply entered stasis due to the Psyker Swarm unleashed by the Old Ones, depriving the C'tan of their much-needed sustenance, awaiting the day that life flourishes throughout the galaxy. However, according to the Book of Mournful Night, a C'tan known as Saranoga the Outsider may in fact remain the sole intact C'tan, having become too terrible in its madness to be defeated. Nonetheless, when the dust had settled, the army of celestial tyrants had been defeated, and all accounted for C'tan were gone. At this point, the Necrons entered a long slumber with their now captive gods to outlast their enemies. With the Great Awakening in the 41st Millennium, the C'tan have been sighted across the galaxy as bound shards used as unwilling weapons of war. However, there are isolated reports of C'tan shards across the galaxy that have broken their chains, intent on revenge. Various free shards of the Deceiver are noted to have begun actively working for various ends. One shard of the Deceiver manipulated members of the Alpha Legion to construct a series of anti-warp pylons within the galactic core before it was trapped in a Tesseract labyrinth. Another shard instigated the Gothic War, which saw the destruction of 4 talismans of Vol, ancient weapons of the Old Ones, notably used to battle the Void Dragon. Other independent shards of the Deceiver have appeared upon Neogeddon and Gladius, leading Necrons and even gathering new slaves in the form of pariahs and followers amongst the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Despite their immeasurable strength, the major weakness of the C'tan is their inability to comprehend the warp. It is speculated that they find it impossible to survive in it, and are particularly susceptible to warp-spawned magics and psychers. During the War in Heaven, they had a plan to block off the warp forever to remove their single greatest threat. And even post-awakening, much of their freed shards efforts are focused on warp nullification. It is also speculated that they have set up the series of mysterious pylons on Cadia, possibly for this purpose. Whether these pylons have anything to do with the Eye of Terror is unknown, as the Eye was not opened until after the C'tan were in their stasis tombs. Although their sightings in the present day are rare, there are a number of anomalies the wider galaxy has observed that are either speculated or known to be C'tan. The following are the most notable. Zul'Chanek is a potentially intact C'tan that was almost awakened on the Necron tomb world Trinect before the Adeptus Custodes intervened. After holding back the hordes of Necrons, they defeated the Cryptex and prevented the awakening. Meanwhile, Saranoga, the Outsider, is a bizarre account of an intact and free Catan in the galactic south. If real, it has gone mad due to the consumption of other Catan and/or an Eldari god. According to an extensive Eldar myth, the outsider is said to have fought their gods, gone mad, then gone into exile, living within a hollow planet far to the galactic south. During the Tyrannic Wars, Joagul Maskelyne, a serviceman of the Imperial Navy, allegedly encountered the astrological engines and twisted geometries of the outsider as his naval ship exited the Immaterium near the edge of the galaxy. His report was compiled with another report noting an unusual change of course by Hive Fleet Leviathan. No known celestial phenomena exist in the location of the Hive Fleet's maneuver. However, auguries revealed a spherical object of unknown origin. The mere ability to have detected it with reflected light indicated either a measurement 32 million times the size of Terra or an albedo range approaching infinity. Further cross-references noted that this site corresponds with the Eldar-monitored site of Lyriax. Whether this site is the final free Catan, projecting a madness so cruel even a Hive fleet avoids its path, or an unknown celestial anomaly remains a mystery. As a final sighting, Magladroth, the Void Dragon, was said to have been the greatest and most terrible of all of the Catan. Although it was eventually shattered, there exists an unusual hypothesized connection between it, the Emperor, and the Mechanicum. In the depths of the Red Planet, there is a chained entity known as the Dragon of Mars. This dragon is believed to have been defeated on Earth by the Emperor, then imprisoned on Mars. The exact date of this battle is unknown. However, it is believed to have been in Cyrene, in Libya, around the 11th or 12th centuries AD, or roughly 300 AD, under the rule of Roman Emperor Diocletian, which would coincide with the legend of St. George and the dragon. Regardless of which is true, it is speculated that this dragon is a fragment of Magladroth, and that in its captivity, it sowed the seeds for the formation of the Mechanicum, purposefully or not. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Warhammer 40,000 Lexicanum.